Before we start our dissection, I would strongly recommend to review the bony anatomy of the scapular region on a skeleton in lab. Up here we have, from posteriorly, we have the supraspinous and infraspinous fossae. Separating them is the spine of the scapula. This protrusion is the acromion. You can see it both on the left side here, which is the posterior view, and anteriorly on the right side here. The head of the humerus is right here, and the head also has an anatomical neck and a surgical neck. And then we have the shaft of the humerus going down here with its characteristic radial groove along here. Now from anteriorly, we have the intertubercular sulcus, which transmits the tendon of the long head of the biceps. Then we have the lesser tubercle here, and where there's a lesser tubercle, there's also a greater tubercle over here. Here's the coracoid process. Coracoid actually comes from Greek and means crow's beak, or coracoides, because it looks a little bit like a crow's beak. Here's the clavicle, and actually an important side note, the clavicle is actually the only real bony connection that we have between the upper limb and the thorax. There's actually the sternoclavicular joint, which would be occurring right about here. Everything else is the scapulothoracic joint. It's basically all just muscles attaching to bone, but there is actually no other bony connection there. So we need that so that we can have a very good free range of motion for the upper limb, because the ultimate function of the upper limb is to place our hand in a position so that we can effectively use it as a grasping tool. Make sure you know the borders of the scapula. Here's your lateral border, the inferior angle, and the medial border. These are going to be important when we talk about attachments of muscles. A couple of main points about the scapular region. We will encounter two different spaces, the triangular space and the quadrangular space. And we'll also encounter the sits muscles, which are the muscles of the rotator cuff. To get to this view from the dissector, you're going to have to use your scalpel and detach the deltoid muscle, which is indicated here, and reflect it away to its distal attachment. Then with a little bit of work and maybe cutting the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus as well, you should be able to identify the superior transverse ligament, and going over and under it, the mnemonic for this is Army-Navy, is going to be the suprascapular artery for Army that goes over the bridge, which is the superior transverse scapular ligament, and the N nerve Navy goes below. Army-Navy, suprascapular nerve and artery. The bridge is the STSL, or superior transverse scapular ligament. Let's have a look down here. Here we then have two spaces. There's a quadrangular space and a triangular space. The quadrangular space transmits the axillary nerve and this artery, which is the posterior circumflex humeral artery. And then we have the triangular space down here, which actually you can find deeply in at the circumflex scapular artery. So a quick rundown of your muscles, supraspinatus and infraspinatus in their respective fossae. Then you have here the teres minor and the teres major. Then you have a long head and a lateral head of the triceps muscle here. And as we've already discussed, here is the deltoid muscle, which is being cut and reflected. Here's the tendon of the infraspinatus muscle, whose function is to laterally rotate the humerus. The supraspinatus muscle up here is actually one of the most important ones, because this is the only one that can actually initiate abduction of the humerus. People that have a lesion of the nerve that provides innervation to the supraspinatus, so the suprascapular nerve, they actually will have to swing out their limb to be able to initiate abduction when then other muscles, for instance the deltoid, take over. The teres minor also laterally rotates the humerus, and the teres major muscle, as you can see down here, as it has a medial attachment on the inferior angle of the scapula here, and a lateral attachment, slightly out of view, on a little lip on the intertubercular sulcus of the humerus. Given these two attachments, its action is going to be adduction and medial rotation of the humerus. Okay, so let's have a look at what this looks like with Anatomy TV. Here's our left shoulder from posteriorly. We already know some of these muscles here. Let's go ahead and remove the deltoid. Okay, deep to the deltoid we can now see your infraspinatus, the teres minor, long head of the triceps brachii, the teres major, rotate this a little bit, and here is the lateral head of the triceps. Hide infraspinatus, hide supraspinatus, and when we turn on the ligaments, we can actually see something interesting right here. If we zoom in, here is your superior transverse scapular ligament. Going superior to it is the suprascapular artery, and inferior to it is the suprascapular nerve. Here is your Army-Navy. Let's rotate a little further like this and tilt. So now we can actually see here several ligaments. In addition to that, there's also this ligament here, which is, or tendon to be precise, the tendon of the long head of the biceps. You can see it's going in the intertubercular groove on its way to its distal attachment side. Let's have a look at our spaces and their boundaries. Here is the posterior circumflex humeral artery and the axillary nerve, and these are coming out of the so-called quadrangular space. The quadrangular space. The boundaries of the quadrangular space are the following. The superior border of the quadrangular space is the inferior border of the teres minor muscle here. The lateral border is going to be the surgical neck of the humerus. The medial border is the lateral border of the long head of the triceps, and the inferior border is going to be the superior border of the teres major. That makes a quadrangular space. The triangular space, on the other hand, is a little smaller and maybe even a little harder to find. Deep in it we can find the circumflex scapular artery, right here. Okay, and the borders of the triangular space are going to be the inferior border of the teres minor. The lateral border is the medial border of the long head of the triceps, and the inferior border is going to be the superior border of the teres major muscle. Here are your muscles of the rotator cuff. Your supraspinatus, your infraspinatus, your teres minor, and the subscapularis. Time for blitz anatomy. Muscles, deltoid. Deep to the deltoid, here is the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, teres major, long head of the triceps, lateral head of the triceps. In here is our quadrangular space transmitting the posterior circumflex humeral artery and the axillary nerve. Down here is our triangular space with the circumflex scapular artery. Our rotator cuff muscles, the sits muscles, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and going all the way around here, subscapularis. Tendon of the long head of the biceps goes through the glenoid cavity and attaches to the supraglenoid tubercle inside the cavity. Let's not forget about this here, the superior transverse scapular ligament, and our Army Navy, which is the suprascapular artery and the suprascapular nerve.